Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Kelly, and I wish I were there with you, but it's a little bit too long of a trip to come from Wyoming, so I'm going to try this on the computer. I met Mike Bobic in the fall of 1978, first day of school at Central High School. At that time, with the junior high system, we went to high school at 10th grade. And I walk into the geometry class. I believe it was second, might have been third period. Just grabbed the first seat in front of the first row without really even thinking about it. I'm sitting there, and the geometry teacher walks back and forth. I get a tap on the shoulder. I look back, and this guy's looking at me. He says, "Hey, who is that?" And it pointed at the geometry teacher. And I said, "Well, that's Mr. Gray. I think he's our geometry teacher." And he says, "Trip him." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Next time he walks by here, stick out your foot and trip him." I said, "I'm not going to stick out my foot and trip him." And he looks at me and says, "Coward." And I kind of sit there, and he smiles and says, "Hi, I'm Mike." And I said, "Hi, I'm Bill." And that was the beginning of 48 years of great friendship. Um, even at that time, Mike had a talent for being outrageous, and yet he was not crude or cruel. That was a rare talent even back in the 70s, and he always had that. That was part of his sense of humor. He could say ridiculous things. He would tell puns. He all sorts of crazy stuff like that. He at times would throw them into serious conversations in a way that could be a little disconcerting. But I came to realize over the last 5 or 10 years that that was one way that Mike would measure people. Sometimes how you respond to some completely off the wall comment is a better indication of where you are than what you're trying to describe. And Mike would do that to try to understand where his friends were. And if somebody was in a bad place, Mike would try to do what it took to help. And and that was a really wonderful thing about Mike. To do that, Mike had to have a lot of self-confidence, and he did. He did not have such a great sense of direction. I had pretty good sense of direction, but not much self-confidence. So we ended up lost a lot. Um, Mike didn't want me telling this story. He should have outlived me because I'm going to tell another story. We came out of a cave one night, and we're going through the woods, and we had gone in the late afternoon, and it had gotten dark, and we got a little off track, and we ended up in the middle of a field, and we're walking across the open field, and we come to a fence. And I look at it and I say, "Well, we didn't cross the fence coming in, so we don't want to cross it now." And we agreed on that. And I said, "We need to go left." And Mike looked and said, "No, we need to go right." I said, I'm pretty sure we got to go left." And he said, "No, we got to go right." We'd been surveying in the cave, so I had a pretty good compass. And I got it out and I measured. Okay, north is back that way. So we definitely need to go left. And Mike said, "No, if north is that way, we definitely got to go right." Well, if we'd gone left, we would have gotten back to the car in 10 minutes. We got back to the car in an hour and a half. Um, I was not really amused. Mike thought it was a wonderful adventure, and that's why Mike is always happier than I was. Um, a memorial to Mike would not be complete without bringing up Mephibosheth. And I hope I'm not stealing anyone else's thunder, but I'm going to take my shot at it. Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, who was the son of King Saul back in biblical times. Um, when David killed Goliath, Saul took him into his household, and David and Jonathan became the closest friends that ever were. And then God took the kingdom from Saul, and there was civil war. And Saul and Jonathan were both killed in that civil war. And pretty much all of Saul's household was killed. But a servant had taken Mephibosheth and gone off to some village to hide him. And Mephibosheth had been crippled from childhood, so he was not part of any army, part of any war. He was just taken off into a village. And once King David got things established, he he sent out servants to look for any relative of Jonathan. He wanted to do right by him. He wanted to do something great for anybody related to his close friend. And they found Mephibosheth, and they brought Mephibosheth back to the palace, and allowed Mephibosheth to live out his years in comfort and security in David's palace. Grandfather Perry, Mike's mother's father, used to give a great sermon about Mephibosheth. I can't begin to compete with that, but he would tell the story beautifully. And his point was that the story of Mephibosheth is a story about grace. It's about how David wanted to show grace and favor to any living relative of Jonathan. And he sought him out and he brought him in. And in the same way, God wants to show grace and favor to us by bringing us into salvation. And again, I can't tell any of this the way grandfather could, or even the way Mike could. But that was the point of the Mephibosheth story was grace. Mike, I think, was an example of understanding grace. Mike was in a lot of pain for a lot of years, and especially over the last 10 or 15 years, he lost a lot of use of his hands. He could, his fingers were numb; they didn't respond correctly. He was often in pain. He was often frustrated, and you put somebody through enough of that, and they're going to respond at times in anger and frustration. But Mike would deal with that, and then it was over. And he extended that grace to himself, which is an important lesson. And he extended that grace to his friends. In the way he responded to us, the way he responded to me, and responded to some of the problems in my life. He was always an example of that grace. And I think that's one of the more important legacies. Um, I'm not quite sure where to go with any of this next. Um, Mike believed that when we got to heaven, we'd have work to do. And he was looking forward to that. He was looking forward to having stuff to do and getting it done and doing it to his full ability and not hampered by the pain and the fatigue of his health problems. And I'm thankful that he has that. Um, he, you know, I don't know whether he's allowed to watch and listen to all this. If he is, I'm sure he is watching and listening with patience and sympathy and grace. He's probably also looking forward to getting back to work because that's who Mike is. Um, One person, I guess, I would want to talk to about whether he gets to listen to this is Mike, but he's gone now. Um, I miss him terribly. You know, he was my best friend for 48 years, and no one's ever going to replace that. But I am thankful. I am thankful that he is free of pain. I am thankful that he is probably doing work that he thoroughly enjoys. I am thankful that he is able to spend time with the loved ones who has passed before him. I know that he is celebrating the fact that he will never again have to work with anything published by Microsoft, and that'll make Mike very, very happy. Um, that's, I guess, all that needs to be said. I've insulted Microsoft and I've talked about Mephibosheth, and I think that's the best we can do to memorialize Mike. And so I just thank you for your patience and thank you all for being here. All the best to all of you. Bye bye.